Evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm actually a bit for words after that wonderful introduction. I don't know who she was talking to, but thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the Public Policy Forum of Canada was largely unknown to me until a few weeks ago. I was aware of it. I knew it was a think tank. And think tanks have always kind of threatened me. And I have been a supporter of the Atlantic Institute here since it was its beginnings, but I never went to a meeting. And I can tell you, think tanks tend to be rather serious and sometimes rather authoritative, and I'm neither. And I thought I'd challenge you all tonight with some public policy issues. I drove over from the island this morning and this afternoon, and as I came across that magnificent bridge, the fixed link that Stewie McGuinness and Elmer McKay had so much to do with causing its building. In fact, every time I go across the bridge, I think about those two gentlemen, both of whom I knew very well, and I'm grateful that it finally got done, because the fixed link to the mainland has been a priority of Prince Edward Islanders since 1874. And finally it's there, and I whizzed across this morning, and I thanked them, and I thanked Brian Mulroney, who was the Prime Minister who signed off on that great project. And I paid my $47.82, and then I drove into the province of New Brunswick. By the way, Frank, the road down by Tormentine needs a little fixing up. But by golly, I got through it all, and I was admiring the springing, and I came to the border with the province of Nova Scotia. And I had to cross a bridge to go from one province to the other. And you know what? Zip. Diddly squat. Free. Oh, that's very interesting. And if I decide to go to Cape Breton tomorrow, I believe I'll be able to travel over a causeway bridge structure to go from Nova Scotia to Cape Breton, which I know is not a province politically, but it is a province in its own mind. And I won't have to pay. An issue of public policy. Should there be a levy of $47.80 for me to come from little Prince Edward Island to share this evening with you from Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, New Brunswick? I think not. And somebody should start examining public policy in support of a remedy to that unjust situation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I had another problem with think tanks, you know. Think tanks make me think of thinkers, which does take me back a number of years, probably further than some of you can remember. But there was, in the late 1950s, something created called the Pugwash Thinkers Conference. And I believe it was a result of the contribution and initiative of one Mr. Cyrus Eaton. Mr. Cyrus Eaton was one of those North Shore people from Nova Scotia North Shore who had gone to the United States, made a pot full of dough, but always remembered his hometown of Pugwash, Nova Scotia. And in his later years, and wanting to put his great fortune to good work, he conceived the idea of bringing influential world leaders to a place where there would be no distractions. Pugwash, Nova Scotia. Now, with apologies to Pugwash, it's actually a charming little town with a very busy salt mine, and but not a lot to distract the great thinkers of the world. And some of you may even remember one of the first conferences included a gentleman by the name of Yuri Gagarin. Raise your hand if you know who that was. Thank you. He was the first man to orbit the Earth, and surely someone we all admired for his courage and survival. So he went to Pugwash, Nova Scotia, to be with the thinkers. I sat on the veranda of my house at Cumberland, Prince Edward Island, which is the south shore of PEI, and as I gaze across the Northumberland Strait, I see the hills of Pugwash, Nova Scotia. And I can remember clearly, I was thinking, what are the thinkers thinking? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really not for a think tank. But when I had this invitation, I thought, by golly, I better find out a little more about this forum. And I came upon the goals of the policy forum, and I'm going to quote from what I read, because I think this is very, very important. Quote, the stated goal is to build bridges between sectors, and to develop applied policy for guidance to, quote, thinkers, deciders, and doers. When I read that, I said, okay, I'm a doer. I belong here. So I'm here. And you know, that goal, as stated in those few words, is actually very, very important. I don't know, Ed, if you wrote it, but someone did with great thought. And it should be followed very carefully, because thinking can become just a little esoteric and perhaps useless. But if thinking is to build bridges between sectors and to develop applied policy for the guidance of thinkers, deciders, and doers. Now, my career has been very fortunate for me. I took over a family business that was established in 1872, and I led that business for 50 years. I retired last year. But during that time, I was able to devote considerable time to public policy issues as a doer. Some of them were mentioned here earlier. One was not mentioned, and that was I was a director and chairman of Northumberland Ferries Limited and Bay Ferries Limited. Anybody know that name? For quite some time. And I've been watching with great interest over the last year or so the press reports of various public commentary on a relationship between Bay Ferries Limited and the province of Nova Scotia in the matter of the operation of the Yarmouth Bar Harbor Ferry Service. Now, I've been away from it for 4 or 5 years, but I know quite well the issues around that service and the operations, which we took over from Marine Atlantic 15 years ago, I suppose. The issue in public policy, which is one of the things we're to be thinking about, the issue is if government is going to support, that's a nice word for subsidize, if it's going to support the operation of a ferry service from Yarmouth to Bar Harbor or Portland, or from Pictou to Prince Edward Island, or from here to there, if a government decides the support of a public service is desirable, and if they also come to the wisdom that a private sector operator will probably be more satisfactory than a crown corporation, then you immediately set up the conflict which is apparent right now in the province of Nova Scotia. And some people of the representatives of the people believe that the details of the contract, the compensation, and everything else should be made public. The company apparently is resisting it, which I surely hope they are, because they should resist it. But it becomes a conflict, and it becomes something that needs to be resolved by clear understanding of what the public policy is. And I'm not sure that is quite the case from what I've been reading in the Tidewater newspaper. What is it? Not Tidewater. Saltwater, that's it. In any event, ladies and gentlemen, that is an example of how public policy needs to adapt to the mechanisms which will develop our economy and move everything forward. Unresolved as yet. Finally, I thought I'd mention, as I was driving over today, I was thinking about Cyrus Eaton from Pugwash, who apparently went to the United States, I think it was Cincinnati, and made a fortune in the steel business down there 100 years ago or so. And I thought, isn't that something? From little Pugwash, a man would become so successful in business. And then I got thinking, well, it's North Shore in the north part of Nova Scotia. I think there's a fellow just down the road there, has something to do with blueberries, who's quite apparently very prosperous, who's married to a Prince Edward Island girl, by the way. And I remember Fox Harbour and Ron Joyce and Tim Hortons and all that went with that, who was really just next to Pugwash. And then I think about Purdy Crawford, who was from just down the road over on the Fundy Shore. I said, by golly, isn't it interesting that those four men have achieved great success coming from the hinterlands of northern Nova Scotia? Perhaps it's because northern Nova Scotia is closer to PEI than the rest of the place. Thank you.